Another crisp morning, another cup of coffee, another story brewing in the back of my mind. These cases, they linger like the scent of old pipe tobacco. You know, after all those years pounding the pavement in the city, where the lights never dim and the noise never truly stops, you develop a certain way of looking at things. Most folks see chaos. I saw patterns. Most folks heard rumors. I sought facts. My entire career was built on the cold, hard reality of human actions, driven by predictable motives, greed, anger, desperation. Never once did I clock in and expect to deal with a genuine ghost or a poltergeist. Logic was my bedrock, my unwavering guide through the darkest alleys and the most labyrinthine schemes. The big city, it strips away your illusions. It teaches you that if something looks supernatural, it is almost certainly a human being with a clever trick up their sleeve, or a simple explanation staring you in the face. People are cunning, often terrifyingly so, when they're playing for high stakes. So, when tales of the impossible surfaced, I didn't reach for a crucifix, I reached for my magnifying glass. I believed in footprints, inconsistencies, and the telltale signs of a lie, not spirits or curses. That unwavering focus on the tangible kept me sane, kept me effective, when the world tried to pull me into the realm of the absurd. But then, when I finally called it quits, traded the sirens for silence, the strange cases started finding me. Not formal assignments, mind you, but desperate pleas from folks out in the quieter corners of the country. Places where the asphalt turns to dirt roads, where old houses stand sentinel over forgotten secrets, and where ancient fears are still very much alive. These were the cases that came wrapped in layers of local folklore, whispered warnings, and genuine, bone-deep dread. When things went wrong in these parts, the first call wasn't always to law enforcement. Sometimes it was to a spiritualist, or even, if they were out of options, a skeptical old detective like me. And that's when my brand of rational thinking really got put to the test. Because when an entire community is convinced they're dealing with the paranormal, and the evidence, at first glance, seems to back them up, well, it forces you to dig deeper than ever before, to dissect the whispers from the wind, to peel back every layer of fear and superstition, no matter how thick. Because where most folks saw phantoms, I always knew there was something far more concrete pulling the strings, and usually far more chilling. This next case took me to a place that felt like time had forgotten it, an old, sprawling mansion, long abandoned, where the phone lines were dead, but the calls, oh, the calls were still coming. They called it the work of phantom calls from the dead. I called it a damn good con. The distressed call came from a distant county, a local deputy sounding utterly perplexed. "We've got a situation here, sir," he stammered out at the Whispering Pines estate. "People are, they're getting calls from the dead, Whispering Pines." I remembered the name, an old, sprawling mansion, sitting forlornly on hundreds of acres of overgrown land, miles from any main road. It had once been the grand residence of a prominent, eccentric family, the Blackwoods, who had vanished without a trace decades ago, leaving their fortune and estate to distant relatives who never bothered with it. Over the years, countless ghost stories had accumulated around the place, tales of spectral figures in the windows, disembodied whispers, and the general feeling of being watched. But recently, the stories had taken a new, more unsettling turn. Residents in the scattered homes around the estate, and even some folks further afield, were claiming to receive cryptic phone calls from the long-disconnected landline of the Whispering Pines mansion. The calls were chilling, sometimes just a low, static-filled hum, other times faint, distant voices whispering names or ominous warnings, often repeating phrases that mimicked the last words of the vanished Blackwoods, or details only they would know. The phone line to the mansion had been officially disconnected years ago. The poles themselves were rotting, the wires long cut. Yet, the calls kept coming, always from that number, often late at night. The local folks, already steeped in the mansion-esque dark lore, were convinced it was the Blackwood family calling from beyond the grave, trying to send a message, or perhaps to draw new victims into their ghostly embrace. Panic was spreading like wildfire, affecting everyone from the isolated farmers to the small-town merchants. The deputy himself admitted to having received one such call, a voice he swore sounded like an old woman, whispering a name he knew belonged to one of the lost Blackwoods. The town was paralyzed by fear. I drove out there. The mansion loomed, a decaying monument to a forgotten era, overgrown with vines, its windows like vacant eyes. The very air around it felt heavy, thick with silence. I listened to the deputy's rattled account, to the terrified locals who swore on their lives they'd heard voices from the grave. I nodded, absorbing the fear, but my mind was already dissecting the impossible. A disconnected landline doesn't just spontaneously reconnect, not without a very deliberate, very human intervention. I wasn't looking for spirits, I was looking for the wires. My first stop was the main junction box, miles down the road, where the phone lines for the entire area converged. It was rusted, dilapidated, but still functional. I found the line specifically designated for Whispering Pines. As expected, it was physically cut, the copper ends frayed and green with corrosion. No incoming power, no signal that confirmed it. Any call coming from that number was a lie, a manufactured illusion. Then I went back to the mansion. I traced the old phone lines from the pole down to the house. They were indeed severed, hanging loose, but as I followed the remnants of the ancient wires into the thick undergrowth, I noticed something subtle, a small, freshly dug trench, barely discernible beneath a layer of freshly scattered leaves and pine needles, leading away from the old, cut phone line. It was expertly camouflaged, but a keen eye, or rather, the practiced eye of a detective looking for anomalies, could spot it. This trench led deep into the sprawling, neglected grounds of the estate, veering off towards an old, rarely visited section near a crumbling gatehouse. I followed that trench for almost a quarter of a mile, pushing through thick brambles and overgrown bushes, until it led me to a small, almost invisible, underground access panel, cleverly hidden beneath a large, flat rock. This was no old relic. This was a recent installation. Inside, a marvel of modern, albeit illicit, technology, there was a compact, solar-powered cellular repeater designed to mimic an old landline connection. It was hooked up to a small, powerful computer, a voice modulator, and a complex recording device. This entire setup was wired directly into the original, but now ray-rooted and freshly connected old phone line from the mansion. This wasn't just a simple hoax. This was sophisticated. This was professional, and the culprit had to have intimate knowledge of both the old telephone infrastructure and the Blackwood family-ass history. I started interviewing anyone who had a connection to the estate or the vanished Blackwoods, the few remaining distant relatives, old groundskeepers, even some history buffs who de-researched the family. Everyone offered theories, but one name kept popping up. A man named Silas Blackwood, a distant, disinherited nephew who believed the family fortune and the estate were rightfully his. He was known to be bitter, obsessed with the vanished family, and had a background in electrical engineering and a brief, shadowy stint in broadcast technology. And he recently moved back to the area, living in a secluded cabin not far from the estate. The pieces started snapping into place, revealing a chillingly calculated scheme. Here's what happened, plain as day. Silas Blackwood, consumed by resentment and a desperate need for the Blackwood fortune, had orchestrated the entire phantom call phenomenon. He wasn't relying on ghosts. He was relying on human fear and a meticulously planned technological deception. First, he painstakingly, secretly, reconnected the old, severed phone line leading from the main junction box to the mansion. He bypassed the official phone company's system, routing it to his hidden underground setup. He then installed the cellular repeater and connected it to his system. This allowed him to transmit calls wirelessly, but disguised them as if they were originating from the old, disconnected landline number of the mansion. It was a brilliant, almost untraceable spoof. Second, he conducted extensive research into the Blackwood family's history, collecting every detail, every quote, every personal anecdote he could find. He then used a sophisticated voice modulator to mimic the voices of the vanished family members, using old recordings he de-sourced from archives or private collections. The cryptic messages and warnings he transmitted were carefully crafted, using phrases and details that only the deceased would supposedly know, thus making them incredibly convincing to the superstitious locals. The low static and hum, that was just him adding atmospheric effects, making it sound like a bed connection from the beyond. But what was the motive beyond simply scaring people? It wasn't just about fear. It was about property value. The Blackwood estate, sprawling and isolated, was highly desirable for a large, confidential development project, perhaps a remote data center, a private retreat, or a specialized research facility. However, the existing legal tangle of the vanished family and the increasing local fear of a haunted property were driving down its value, making any official sale or development impossible without a clean title and public acceptance. Silas's plan was to systematically drive down the perceived value of the surrounding land and the estate itself to rock bottom through sustained, terrifying hauntings, making it utterly unsellable to anyone but a very specific, discreet buyer at a drastically reduced price. He aimed to acquire the land for next to nothing, perhaps through a shell corporation, then sell it at a massive profit to the developers who valued discretion and a remote location above all else. His phantom calls were designed not just to scare, but to systematically destabilize the community, making them desperate to leave, or at least eager to sell their properties at any price. The warning calls about danger were specifically targeted to make residents believe their homes, not just the mansion, were also cursed, encouraging them to abandon or sell cheaply. The deputy's call from the dead Silas, knowing the deputy's personal history with the Blackwoods, had specifically targeted him, providing a detail intimate enough to solidify the belief. He was manipulating everyone, turning their fears into a financial opportunity. No ghosts, just a greedy, vengeful relative with a twisted mind and a knack for electronics. He used the very history of his family as disappearance to orchestrate a chillingly effective property scam. So, there you have it, the case of the phantom calls from Whispering Pines. No spirits haunting the old lines, no voices echoing from beyond the grave. Just a perfectly rational, albeit utterly cold-blooded, instance of human greed and an almost breathtaking level of technological deception. This one truly stuck with me because it showed how cynically human desperation and ancient fears can be exploited for profit. These were simple, hard-working people living their lives, and someone decided to turn their deepest superstitions into a weapon against them. They weren't just scared. Their lives were being systematically dismantled by a man who knew exactly which buttons to push and how to make the impossible seem terrifyingly real. He literally used the tragic history of his own family as a tool for financial gain. It has a chilling thought, isn't it, that the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones in the dusty old books. They raid the ones who look just like you and me, walking among us, planning, manipulating, and using our very beliefs against us. They don't need ectoplasm or levitating objects. They just need a well-placed rumor, some clever electronics, and an audience willing to be convinced that something supernatural is at play. They want you to blame the ghost, or the curse, not the quiet, resentful man with a hidden receiver. For me, it reinforced the idea that human ingenuity, when applied to wickedness, can be far more terrifying and elaborate than any supernatural phenomenon. A skilled criminal doesn't just break in or make threats. They construct an entire alternate reality, a psychological warfare campaign, to achieve their goals. So, the next time you hear a wild tale of a cursed place, or a voice from beyond, especially when it seems to benefit someone, pause. Don't jump to conclusions, no matter how thrilling or terrifying they might seem. Look for the small details, the freshly disturbed ground, the hidden wires, the motive that makes no sense for a spirit, but perfect sense for a human being. Because often, the true horror isn't some ancient curse. It has the cold, calculated intent of another human being. And that, in my book, is far more terrifying. Until next time, stay curious, but always stay skeptical, and maybe check your phone lines.